So hello and welcome everyone to this accessibility update. It is now exactly 1 o'clock and I have the sunshine in my eyes. I think we will wait just one more minute to make sure that everyone can join the webinar before we start the actual activities. Okay, so let's start. Welcome again, everyone, to this accessibility update. We do have, as usual, a very packed agenda, and I would like to ask you to pose any questions in the Q&A function, and then we will try to respond to them at the end of the session. We have live captions today, and if you please use the CC function in Zoom, if you would like to have them presented to you that way. And I will ask one of my colleagues to also send out to post the stream text link in the chat so that everyone who prefers to have the captions separately can get them there. And today we also have automatic translated live captions into Swedish. If you follow, I believe it's the same link or maybe a second link. And as you can see, we also have international sign today. The agenda for this update, we have 1.5 hours, is just the welcome and introduction as usual. And my name is Susanna Loren and I'm the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Funka. We will then present one of our new projects called Intux, just starting that one. And then all projects come to an end. So we also have a finished project that just finished recently on cognitive accessibility. We will, of course, have a coffee break, and then we will have a short update on 2 projects that we run in parallel around captioning. And we will also have a quick update on the UPower project that we used the previous accessibility update to speak quite a lot about. So we won't do a long presentation there, but just an update so that all of you who participated and contributed to the workshop last time, that you know what this all resulted in. Then we move to maybe the most exciting part of this whole event, and that is the policy update from the European Disability Forum. Then we have the Q&A, where everyone is, of course, welcome to pose questions to us. And again, I will ask you to use the QA function. That makes it much easier for me. If you post questions in the chat, then it's much harder for me to see them. So that is the agenda for today. And hopefully we will manage to finish very sharply at 2:30. We have more than 300 registered participants today from, if I counted correctly, just under 40 different countries. So coming from all continents, as far as I could see, even Australia. So welcome everyone. And this webinar is recorded and will be posted on the Funka Research and Innovation YouTube channel afterwards. So the speakers of today are Alejandro Moledo, who is the Deputy Director and Head of Policy at the European Disability Forum. And Alejandro is always with us on these updates to make sure that we know everything that is important from the disability policy at the EU level. And I have no clue what he's going to say today. It's always a surprise what he picks from his long list of interesting things that he wants to share with you. But I'm sure it's always the most important things that you need to know. And then I have my colleague Lisa Engström from Funka. She's a UX researcher and UX designer, and she's going to present one of the projects today. And my other colleague, Peter Kemeny, who is a project manager and accessibility expert at the Funka Research and Innovation Department, will give you the update of the UPower project. And then it's just me, and most of you have probably heard me speak before. So if I click on the right button, I would like to start with just a short update about Funka for those of you who may not have been with us before. Funka is an accessibility expert consultancy, but we were started once upon a time in the mid-90s by the disability movement in Sweden. So all the disability organizations came together to work on a project on accessibility and a portal at that time. It was early days for the internet, and we wanted to make sure that internet works for everyone. So we started out as an NGO, but at the year of 2000, the technology that was developed in the project and also the knowledge and the competence of the people working there created a private company. So since the year 2000, we are a commercial company, privately owned, and now focusing on accessibility in the digital arena. So in the consultancy part of the company, we focus on analysis, training, testing, supporting, so everything that is usually done by accessibility experts. And what maybe makes us different from other accessibility companies are that we also have the research and innovation department, where we can do non-commercial things and really dig deep into the nerdy solutions. So, and that is the department where Lisa and Peter and I and our other colleagues are working. Funka also has a very good and close relationship and collaboration with end users and disabled persons organizations. And especially in the research and innovation projects, we work very user-centric and do user testing and so on. So we need to have a good relation also with the real experts on accessibility, which are, of course, the real users. And therefore, we also not only during our regular working hours, but also the specific events where we kind of reach out specifically to end users with disabilities and disabled persons organizations. I think these are really important traditions that we have to share the knowledge with you. We also work at more of the strategic level with policy and the lawmaking processes of Europe, because now we are in a place where specifically the accessibility legislation has moved very fast in the last year and will continue doing for a couple of years more, as you probably know. And we're also quite a lot engaged in standards production and also carrying out studies for the European Commission and national governments. So you can say that we work on many different levels in the accessibility world or the disability ecosystem. We're also one of the proud founders of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, IAAP, who now has more than 5,000 members in over 100 countries around the world. So that is an important legacy, I think, that we were one of the founders of this association, who is also a member of the European Disability Forum. So we kind of continue the collaboration there. Enough about us. Why do we do research? Well, we think that is really important that we do research, and it is still needed. Even though accessibility has been on the agenda for a long time, still society at large, so-called experts, no matter if they are researchers or practitioners or in the IT industry or in public sector or whatever, we still don't know enough about how users perceive and can handle the digital tools that we have around us. And the technology is evolving very fast, and that means that we need to keep learning and keep testing to make sure that technology is serving people and not the other way around. So research is needed. That is really why we do research. It's also very fun. And when we talk about our research projects, those can be born or created from three different perspectives. So often we have an idea, we find something, we stumble over something, or we get irritated over something, and we think this needs to be solved, or we need to investigate this, we need to test it with users, we need to do something about this because this doesn't work as it should do. Or we see a potential in new technology and say, this, maybe we could kind of connect things here and make something that makes the world even better for people with disabilities. Another way that a project can be created in our little world is that someone else has an idea, and not not seldom these ideas come in these kind of events or workshops, and when we meet people with disabilities and disabled persons organizations. I think at least 3 or 4, maybe more of the projects that we run now actually came out of this kind of accessibility update event, where somebody said, we would like to do this, or we have this challenge, or we would really like to focus on this, but we don't know how to do it. And then please do reach out. You're very welcome to ask us, and maybe we can find a way to collaborate and even search for funding together so that we can improve the situation, whatever that is about. And then the third way a project can happen is that the European Commission or another funding instrument, innovation competitions or such things at EU level, bilateral level, regional level, local level even, they write a specific call where they say, now we are looking for innovation in this specific area. And then we can, of course, make a proposal on that. So, but all these 3 ways that projects can kind of appear are equally interesting and valuable to us, and we try to mix as much as possible. But I can assure you that we have a long list of ideas that we would someday like to carry out if we find the right partners and the right funding instrument. So the criteria we use to say yes when we are invited to a project, because that is of course also the case, that somebody comes to us with an idea and say, we already want to do this project, would you like to join us? Then to be able to go into and really invest in a project, we have specific criteria that need to be fulfilled. Otherwise, we are not really, it's not for us to be in there. So we want the project to solve a real tangible problem. There are quite a few research projects out there that seem to be a little bit fluffy, if you will. They're not concrete, or you don't really see what the result will be, what are the conclusions of this, and then we are not really interested. We would like to have a real problem and make sure that we can make a real difference. We also are very picky when it comes to the partners. We only want to work with either friends or people we know from before, or partners that we deem like very serious and that have resources enough to carry out a good piece of work. We also need to see that we at the Research and Innovation Department, that we can be part of this solution. I mean, there may be, I'm sure there are many projects out there and project ideas that are fantastic, but we don't really have the competence to add to this. So there needs to be kind of a place where our competencies fit into the project. So we do not write project proposals on the behalf of others if there is not room for us in it. We need to be part of this to make that investment. We also look very closely at what we believe the potential is for the project to be funded, because it's a lot of work to write a proposal, and then we need to know that it has a chance to actually get funded. Otherwise, it's a little bit waste of time and energy. And then, of course, the last, but maybe the most important one, is that we want the results to have either the results or what we learn during the project period to have really a potential to contribute to a better world for people with disabilities. This sounds very kind of high level, but it's really true that we only do this because we think it's important to improve the situation for these user groups. And if and when we find projects and partners and ideas that fulfill these criteria, then we do work in a very user-centered approach. So no matter what the project is about or what objectives there are or what the methodology is like, we really try as much as possible to include this approach in our part of the project. So we do quite a lot of user testing. We do focus groups with various target audiences. We do in-depth interviews, of course, and we also have a test panel where people who do not, when we don't have a specific project going on right now where we do user tests, but we're always interested in collecting more names and people who are interested in testing things in the future. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. And we actually still believe, after all these years, that if we work together, we can make a change. And that is what we are really aiming for in all our work. If you would like to be involved, you can, of course, just write to us in the Q&A or in the chat, or answer to the email you got with the invitation for this, or you can reach us specifically at research@funka.com. So research@funka.com. Then someone in our team will respond to that. Or any questions you have, of course, always welcome. So that's the introduction. And now I would like to go on to the first example of projects that we are going to talk about today. And the first project that I would like to introduce to you is called INTAX. And this means introducing training on user testing with people with disabilities into UX design and related higher education programs. Wow, that is long. So I'm happy that we have an acronym for that, or abbreviation. So we call it INTAX, but it has to do with making sure that students of UX design, that they know how to carry out user testing with people with disabilities. So that is the essence of this, and it may have been possible to make a shorter heading or name of this, but we call it INTAX. So in this project, and it's really just starting right now, we have the funding from the Erasmus program, and it's a really neat setup of partners in the consortium, because we have one university and one disabled persons organization in 3 countries, and then Funka provide the accessibility expertise. So we have the leaders of this project is called the Turiba University in Latvia, and we have the umbrella organization for disabled persons organizations in Latvia called Sustento. And then we have the University of Maribor in Slovenia, and the National Council of Disability Organizations in Slovenia, which is the umbrella organization of Slovenia. We have the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, which is the technical university of Madrid from Spain. And in Spain, we have the Autismo Sevilla, which is this autism organization, the organization for people with autism in Sevilla, in Spain. And then we have Funka from Sweden. So that is it's a nice consortium with a good mix of researchers and end user perspectives. And the whole idea of this project came about really from something we have been working with in the Nordic countries for quite a few years. And also we did a Nordic project on this a couple of years ago. And it has to do with user involvement in product and service design. So it's interesting because no matter if you talk to the industry or the public sector or the academy, everyone seems to agree that if you involve users and do user testing when you create a product or a service, that improves the product or service. So there's no one doubting, it seems like this is a good idea. And it's kind of self-evident. If you want to create something for someone, then talk to that someone to know what the need and the wishes are for that kind of target audience or client, potential customers or members or whatever. So, but even so, when we look at the organizations who do carry out user testing, we find that very few of them actually test with a diverse group of testers. So this can be that the age groups are not diverse enough, or the level of education, or the gender balance, or many things like that. Sometimes it seems like people, when they do user testing, they kind of ask their friends and family, which is good and a good start, but it doesn't mean that you get all the perspectives from all different user groups. And when we look at if they do user testing with specifically with people with disabilities, then it's just a fraction of the organizations who do create products and services, or supply or buy even products or services, who make sure that the product is kind of the development process is involving users in any way. So too few do user testing, and even fewer involve people with disabilities in the user testing. And it really, not only our research, but also many other studies show that even if people say, or organizations say that it's important, it's still not done. So this can have many reasons, of course, and also many different ways of solving this or bridging this gap. And we think that one of the one way to try to make a difference here is to train the next generation of UX designers so that they at least know how to do it. And then hopefully gradually we will change this. Because when this doesn't work, when people with disabilities are not involved, or no one is involved in the product development, then it's the users who have to live with these bad solutions. And this is what we see in inaccessibility. I mean, the reason why we need policy and legislation in accessibility is because it isn't done kind of like a normal way, of the natural way of creating a product or solution. Then accessibility is forgotten or omitted. And then the result of that is that the users have a bad solution, but also the companies selling the product or the public sector body providing the service, they also get the negative sides of this, because either they don't sell as much as they could, or they don't get happy clients, or they need to, if it's a service that every citizen is entitled to, then the public sector needs to provide this information or this service in another way. And that usually costs even more money, because you need to do it kind of at an individual basis. So then taxpayers' money is lost in that vicious circle as well. So we all lose when this is not done right. And in this project, we are going to do a couple of things. We are going to collect the best practices out there. So instead of just complaining over what is not being done, really trying to look into where does this work well? Which public sector bodies or private companies do user testing with people with disabilities in an efficient and successful way? So really with desk research and a literature review and so on, collect the best practices out there already, and then define how we want to, what is this best practice, and why do we believe it's successful. And we're also going to ask the users, of course. So when we have collected the best practices, we are going to have workshops with users. So stay tuned, you will be invited again to make sure that the best practices we have collected are also accepted or seen as beneficial from the user collective. We are also going to do a survey where we will ask end users with disabilities about their experiences when it comes to user testing. So if they have ever been invited, and I mean, if so, if they have any experience in user testing, and if that was a positive experience or not, if they were taken care of in a good way, or if they were paid, and if there was a good service around transportation and all of these things. So we're really pinpointing the user experience here. And based on these activities, we are then going to create a training course on how to carry out inclusive and accessible user testing. And this is then going to be piloted on students who study UX design. The project is also going to produce a handbook covering this content. And also, we are also then again addressing the end users with workshops where really the focus is on empowerment, so that the user knows their own value. For example, explaining that you need to get paid if you're an expert, and if you do a user test, then you shouldn't just do that for free. You should always be well treated and have good information, and also get paid for the work you do. So that is in essence what we are going to do in the upcoming 2 years in this project. So looking forward to seeing you again around these activities, around the service surveys and the workshops that will be coming up in the upcoming period. And then we turn to another project, which is a finished one, a project that we carried out in 2022. And just a little bit of background to that before I let Lisa describe the results of this project. As we have talked about at several of these updates before, there is a gap in the standards and the legislation when it comes to cognition. So most of the standards and the legal requirements are often on more based on or focusing on physical disabilities. And to bridge that gap, quite a lot of activities are going on. At Funka, we have really focused on making sure that the kind of soft recommendations and guidelines and so on that are out there, that they can be converted into measurable criteria, because if a criteria is measurable, then it is possible to put it into a standard that will then be the baseline for the legislation. So we have done a series of different projects where we, from different angles and perspectives, have tried to make sure that we stepwise create more and more criteria that can be used for that purpose. And one of all of these cognitive activities that we have been doing is a rather small Norwegian project where we did very specific things. So please, Lisa, if you want to present this project for us.
Hi, yes, thank you, Susanna. Absolutely. I'm very happy to be here today. So my name is Lisa, and I work as a UX designer and UX researcher at the Funka's Research and Innovation Department together with Susanna. And I will present this project that's just finished. And the project has a very fancy, nice name in Norwegian, but translated to English, it's called Cognitive Accessibility in Public Digital Services. And as Susanna mentioned, cognitive accessibility is something that we know benefits everyone, but that there is a big gap in knowledge. So everyone with or without disabilities need websites that are logical and easy to navigate and easy to understand. And everyone with or without a disability struggle more or less if websites aren't cognitive accessible. So, and even though there are these guidelines on cognitive accessibility out there, they are less known. And as Susanna said, as the web accessibility standards in the legislation do not say so much about cognitive accessibility, it also results in that many website owners don't know how to make their websites more understandable. So this is why we find these projects so important to do, and the research about cognitive accessibility to continue. In this project, we wanted to test criteria on cognitive accessibility in practice and also test them with users. So in this project, we developed and tried out new techniques for how we could apply this criteria in practice. And the goal with the project was to see in what extent these solutions that we developed, if they could help users to interact with an interface. And to do this, we collaborated with the Norwegian National Office for Social Insurance, that is called NAV. And there we wanted to see how their web-based services could be improved. NAV in Norway is a huge public sector website that it covers both social security and also employment benefits. So it's a very important website for a large group of users. The result of the user test that we did in this project were then used to write up guidelines for website owner how they could apply cognitive criteria in practice. And as Susanna said, the project took place during 2022, and it was founded by the Norwegian Directorate for Children, Youth and Family Affairs. That's also a very long name, but in short, it's called Bufdir. So in the project, we selected 4 criteria or guidelines on cognitive accessibility that we wanted to look at specifically. And for these criteria, we created prototypes and we carried out user testing. And the different criteria that we selected from this project was, the first one is vocabulary support, how we can make it more easy for users to understand difficult words that are on the website. And in this project, we looked at a solution with a short dictionary and a tooltip that could explain these difficult words. We also chose a criteria for consistency of interactive elements, that the website should have the same look and feel. So make sure that the clickable elements on the website, like links and different kind of lists, that they look the same throughout the service. The third criteria that we chose was to make the purpose of large volumes of text clear, so that you give the user an introduction to the content before presenting the large chunk of text on the website. And the final criteria that we looked at was to organize content into well-defined groups. This can be done in different ways, like using lists and spacing to break up larger pieces of text into coherent smaller groups. So this was the criteria that we looked at. And to test these criteria, we asked users with cognitive impairments to help us test the web-based services to see if this criteria made a difference. We also had a small group of people who didn't identify of having a cognitive impairment as a small control group. And during the user tests, some of the users tested prototypes where the cognitive criteria had been implemented, and some users tested prototypes that didn't include this criteria. So the key findings, what did we learn from this project? So the main thing, the most obvious one that we found was that the service that had the most text on them also were the ones that the users had the most problems with, both when it comes to understanding, but also navigation. And even though we worked with structure the content according to best practice, this wasn't enough. And the users still found the amount of text on the page to be overwhelming, no matter how well structured it was. So we therefore concluded that if there is an information overload, it is difficult to use design to help the users. Then the information simply needs to be reduced. Another important finding from this project was that it is very important for users that the web-based services looks and acts the same in all the steps of the service. So if menus and buttons, if they change places from one part of the service to another, it causes confusion and it makes it difficult for the user to concentrate on the content at hand. And third key finding was that the users that participated in this test, they very much appreciated the vocabulary support that we added. So we had 2 different solutions here. We tried both a tooltip solution with an explanation of the word that could be found directly in the text, and also a solution with a short dictionary that was placed together with a menu on the side of the main text. And both of these solutions made it easier for the user to understand the content without having to go somewhere else to find an explanation for the terms. The report from this project, it will be in Norwegian, but if you're interested to know more about the other projects that we have done before on cognitive accessibility, you can read about them. We have, for example, carried out a large study on behalf of the European Commission it was a research project, and we also have another research project where we focused on this testing these measurable cognitive criteria that could be tested, that you can read up on. And we also have a research project where we developed a repository of assistive technology, where users get AI support to find the tools most suitable for them. So I will, the URLs are quite long, but I will share these links in the chats with you, so you can read there if you want to. Thank you so much. That was all that I had.
Thank you, Lisa. There was a lot of information in a short time, so thank you for wrapping up all of these interesting findings. And I just wanted to, before we take a quick coffee break, to mention a couple of comments that we have got in the Q&A. So we have one user or one participant saying that another problem is a website with many moving or flashing parts, videos popping up and even starting, etc., which makes it hard to be on that website for people with neurological issues. And that is, of course, true. And I think Lisa said that we did a collection of some of the criteria, but we know for sure, and that is also known, I think, to the research community and many practitioners, that there are long lists of potential cognitive issues where things that move around and videos starting directly and so on is definitely one of these items that could be extremely hard for people with problems focusing, or even for my eyesight, it's really bad when things move around because I have a problem not looking at them at that time. So absolutely, that is another of these issues that are really important. And we have another or more of a question around if we have thought of using like ChatGPT or other AI things to explain long page to make it shorter and easier to understand, if the use of AI to make the web more accessible for people with cognitive impairments, if that is something we have worked with. And that's a really interesting question, I think, and also an exciting opportunity here that is now being much more, I think, something that is on many people's minds these days to work on. And yes, we have thought about this, and yes, we have actually also done a little bit of research. We are not AI specialists, but we have been working together with AI specialists, both in the Buddy project that Lisa mentioned, that is based on AI, and also one more specific on language, where we tested AI to see if we could make the machine learning piece create easy to read, or plain language, rather. I think it was more focused on plain language, if I remember correctly. So really seeing if we could support the web authors when they are writing, or the users when they are reading, and make sure that we, with machine learning, can make the content easier to grasp or understand. And we are certainly not the only ones doing that. That research, similar research and other really interesting research is being done on the language piece nowadays. So I think we will see, and I hope we will see a lot of increase in services and ideas around this using the AI. It's really fascinating technology. We just need to make sure that it's used in a good way for people with disabilities, but much more to come on that, I'm absolutely sure. And I also hope that, I know that the European Commission funding has the New Horizon projects and proposals. There are several of them that have AI components in them. So I really believe we will see much more of that in the future, and we'd be more than happy to dig deeper into those things as well. So I think we will move on to another important piece, and that is the coffee break. So we will have 10 minutes for coffee break, and we are longing to meet with people, but we also find it fantastic that we get so many people joining this from all parts of the world. So the bad thing is that we can't offer you coffee. You will have to find your own coffee. But let's have a short break so that everyone keeps fresh, and then we reconvene in 10 minutes. So 10 to 2 Central European time. Please stay with us and get away from your keyboard for a while to feel fresh when we continue. So welcome back, everyone. So let's see if we can continue this. I hope you all had a short but calming break. I just want to respond to one more question that we got already before the break, and that was whether the final report of the Norwegian project will be published. And yes, it will be published. It's just being wrapped up now, and the reporting is supposed to happen next week. So as soon as we have the final approval from the funding instrument, it will be published, of course, on the Funka website, and we can send a link to that in the email that we send out after this webinar, because it also seems like we do not have the possibility to send out the URLs that we promised in the chat function. So we will send you an email. Everyone that has been participating today will get a thank you email, and there we will have all the resources that Lisa mentioned, and also we can link to the publication page, although that won't be published until maybe a week or so, 10 days or something like that, but it will be definitely publicly available. So thank you for those questions, and let's move on to the 2 quick updates that I promised. So the first one is on both of our captioning projects that we are doing. We are doing 2 things in parallel here. One smaller project in Norway that is also just finishing, and a Swedish national captioning project that is running for another 1.5 years or so, or at least a little bit more than a year. So, of course, the background of the captioning projects is to make sure that more videos and other multimedia is captioned, to make sure that we make them more accessible for everyone. So the main activities that are kind of in parallel to these 2 projects, one funded by Bufdir, so the same funding instrument that funded the project that Lisa was talking about, and then Allmänna arvsfonden, which is the inheritance fund in Sweden. They have similar ideas and goals in the activities, and that is to raise awareness around why captioning is so important, and how big the user groups or potential user groups who really need and benefit from captioning are. Strangely enough, this is still not common knowledge everywhere. So really, it's a lot about awareness raising and making sure that people are aware about how important captioning is, not only for people with disabilities, but for everyone, because research shows that around 80% of users with or without disabilities prefer to look at videos with no audio, especially in social media contexts. So if you want your users to look at your video and understand your message, then captioning is a really, really good idea. So a lot of awareness raising is happening, and also we are really trying to make a case for the auto captions and manual captions being used in the right combination and at the right times. So there is still a misunderstanding that auto captions are always bad, and they are not yet, at least not in small languages, as good as the manual ones, but they are improving fast even in smaller languages. And really, if we use them, it's also possible that they will improve in the future. And to make sure that everything, or as much as possible, is captioned, then we believe firmly, and the hard of hearing organizations that we work together will also believe, that we need to use the technology as well as the manual captioning or live captioning, professional captioning, whatever you want to call it when it's perfectly done. Because not in every meeting, in every time we use Teams or Zoom or Google Meet and every working environment, even if we would like to have professional captions there, that is not feasible. No one has that amount of money and there are not enough professional captionists around. So we need to also use the automatic text captions and then try to improve them as much as possible, of course. So in both of those projects, we are creating training and instructions to make sure that people understand what tools are out there and how to provide captions, and also how you can do auto captions in the beginning and then update them and complement them in a manual way, so that when you then publish your video, it becomes really, really, really good if the auto captions are not good enough. And in the Swedish project, we also have, which is a much bigger project, we also have a more technical component where we work together with some of the auto captioning tool makers and really the big suppliers. And we are creating a kind of a crowd development activity where we have more than 50 organizations who are going to caption everything they do in around 3 months' time. So that piece is a little bit delayed. It should have been starting very soon and it will come later this spring, but it's really exciting to see how much engagement we get from people who now really want to show that they can caption quite a lot of things. And we are doing user testing before, user testing after, to see both how the organizations change their processes and how and if people who didn't know that they needed captions would maybe appreciate it when it's provided to them. And also, of course, how the machine learning process is improved when there is more data in the small language areas. So that is what we are focusing on in the captioning area, and we will be back soon with more results and more information about those projects. But I just wanted to let you know that we are working on it, and it's still really top of mind for us. And then we have a short update also from Peter on the U-Power project.
Yes. Hello, hi, I'm Peter Kamin. I work also at Funka in the Research and Innovation Department with Susanna and Lisa. And in the last accessibility update in June, you could hear a lot about the U-Power project. So I will just give a quick update now to see how we moved ahead. The main aim of the project is to make better use of the accessibility feedback mechanism that was established in the Web Accessibility Directive. So all public sector websites and mobile apps need to have a feedback channel, a feedback mechanism where users can give feedback on the accessibility or actually the inaccessibility of the websites and apps. And the full name of the project is Users Power the Web Accessibility Directive, which reflects the main idea behind this project is that users have the most knowledge and experience about accessibility and inaccessibility of websites and apps, and they are the best placed to provide their feedback about it. And this feedback would be extremely valuable for owners of websites and apps to make their websites and apps more accessible. In our experience and based on our research, the feedback mechanism is unfortunately very much underused. So the main aim of the project is to help users, support users to provide more and more actionable feedback, and thus they can help make websites and apps more accessible. And the project is an Erasmus Plus project, started last year and will finish next year. And the project partners are the Technical University of Dortmund from Germany, the European Blind Union, the Synthesis Center for Research and Education from Cyprus, and us, Funka, from Sweden. And apropos of this update is that I'm very happy to announce that we published the first project result, which is a toolkit about feedback. And it's a useful toolkit for end users, website owners, and training providers as well. And it covers quite a lot about feedback and feedback mechanisms. It has a basic description of different mechanisms and different feedback channels, like providing feedback via email or using a form. And it also has an overview of what should be part of a feedback so that the website owners can make the best use of it. And it also lists the main challenges to providing feedback, but also tips useful for website owners to avoid these challenges and for end users to overcome some of them. So there could be more feedback and better feedback. The toolkit was created with the help of end users. We had a survey, and the last accessibility update, we had a validation workshop. And here I would like to thank everybody who participated and helped us to find the most relevant aspects and to create this toolkit as useful as possible. And we think it is a useful one. So where can you find it? You can find the toolkit, you can download the toolkit from our website, from the project website, www.funka.com/en/upower-toolkit. We'll share the URL in the chat as well. This is the first outcome. We will also have a repository of best practices helping to improve feedback mechanisms. And we'll also create a model curriculum for trainings that would train end users to provide actionable feedback, and a guidance that would help the trainers. So I hope you'll have a look at it and you'll find it as useful as we intended it to be. That was the short update. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box, and I'll give the word back to Susanna, or maybe Alejandro already.
So thank you, Peter. That was a very good update. So now we know exactly where we are at in the UPower project, and it is a long link, but funka.com/en for English /upower-toolkit. And I can see that we now have the chat going, so it's also posted there. And I got a question about the PowerPoint presentation, and I can assure you that the PowerPoint presentations, those of you who do not see the PowerPoint presentations, that everything that we show are just decorative images and bullet points, and everything that we think is important, we spell it out and post it also in the chat now that the chat works, which is good. Thank you, Alberto, for that. So, and again, just the email address for us, research@funka.com. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Alejandro for the policy update.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and many thanks for organizing these updates. I feel like now I will talk about policies, and they are not as exciting as the projects, of course, but nevertheless, they are important. So since you gave me discretion to pick the most interesting policy updates, I will do so, and I hope all the participants will find it interesting. I work at the European Disability Forum, and obviously, as an advocacy organization, we are very much closely looking at the Commission implementation of the CRPD, and particularly the implementation of the disability strategy that was launched in 2021, as you all know, and with a particular focus on the flagship initiatives of this strategy and some of the actions that I will highlight for you today. So let's start with the strategy first. I will stress the launch of the employment package. This is a series of documents and supporting materials for member states to increase the employment rate of persons with disabilities, which, as you know, is still lower compared to those without disabilities, a difference of 25%. But last September, they launched this package with a series of, let's say, deliverables. And one of them is already published, which is quite interesting. It's a toolkit for public employment services and how they can become more inclusive and cater the needs of persons with disabilities. So that's something that we can already promote at national level. And then this year, also within the framework of this employment package, we will work on one of the key issues and where we find most uncertainties among employers and public authorities, reasonable accommodation. So this year, one of the deliverables of this employment package will be to develop a guidance on reasonable accommodation. This will be published this year, and hopefully next year there will be a study on the transition from shelter employment to the open labor market, which is something that from the disability movement we very much advocate in line with the CRPD. Then also another important flagship initiative, as they call it, of the disability platform will be launched this year, actually two more. The first one that I want to mention is the guidelines on the institutionalization. So how, because also there are some misunderstandings or some different interpretation on how to make this transition from institutional to community-based living. And also since the EU has set up the requirements for the use of European funds, we need to make sure that public money, taxpayers' money, is invested in independent living and community-based services in accessible communities. And last but not least, the other two flagship initiatives that will be launched this year. One of them is, I would say, one of the most requested and desired actions that we've been calling for years is the European Disability Card. Finally, this card that at the moment is a pilot project, as you know, in 8 countries, will become at least a reality as a proposal, as a legislative proposal. So we expect that this card will ensure the mutual recognition of disability across the whole of the EU, and we expect this legislation to be proposed in autumn this year. So this will be a very, very important piece of legislation in which we will all need to work. And during this spring, we expect that the Commission will launch the public consultation to ask for our views on what we expect from this card, which obviously from EDF we expect that it goes beyond the scope of the pilot project, which was very much focused on leisure, culture and sports, so discounts and all to enter museums and cinemas, etc. But really to go to other key areas in which a disability recognition should be ensured, for example, on transport. So many people with invisible disabilities, sometimes they struggle to get assistance in stations or in airports. So we hope that the disability card will facilitate the freedom of movement of persons with disabilities as well. The other big flagship initiative that was promised for last year, but it has not yet started, at least publicly, is the Accessible EU Center. This is a response to one of the demands of EDF. I think we discussed it in the previous EDF Funka update. We were calling for the creation of a European agency to focus on accessibility, because now we have all this important legislation, the Web Accessibility Directive, the European Accessibility Act, the Audiovisual Media Service Directive, telecommunications. So we have a series of standards and hard legislation which need to be implemented. And as we all know, accessibility, when it comes to implementation, it it becomes more technical, and we believe that such a resource center for the moment, but hopefully in the future, an European agency is very much needed to really build the capacity of all the people, all the companies, all the entities that need to implement accessibility. Finally, a little note concerning the strategy. The Commission has finally published the promised Web Accessibility Action Plan, which relates to their own websites and mobile applications. This was already promised back in 2018 to the European Ombudsman, but since then it was delayed. We didn't know why. We have not been, unfortunately, involved in the development of this plan. We just found just before Christmas that they published it very quietly. So now we are studying and seeing what the Commission plans to do to improve their own websites and their own platforms. At a first glance, it looks like they want, for example, to comply with certain provisions that are put for member states, like the feedback mechanism or the enforcement mechanism. So we expect that the EU websites also have this kind of tools for the users, right? And beyond the strategy, and very briefly, but before I go into the other policies, I just want to mention another big objective or piece of work for the disability movement this year. And this is that the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is reviewing how the EU is implementing the CRPD. And last year, they published a series of questions that the Commission needs to reply by April this year. And based on their replies, the CRPD committee will publish what is called the concluding observations, meaning recommendations on how the EU can better implement the CRPD. So obviously from the disability movement, EDF, and all of our members, we will be giving feedback and information to the UN CRPD committee, so they can do a good review and a good assessment on how the EU is implementing the convention. And now, very briefly, concerning the updates on disability policies. Since last time we talked, we have two directives adopted, one concerning pay transparency. In this directive, we also advocated for the inclusion of accessibility. So the information provided to employers or applicants to a vacancy must be accessible to persons with disabilities. And then another piece of legislation concerning employment as well is the minimum wage directive, which was also adopted. And this directive aims at ensuring equal pay for equal work. So in this case, we want to ensure, or we advocated for the equal pay and for equal work also for people, for example, in shelter employment. We will keep on working on the Artificial Intelligence Act. I think we discussed it last time as well. This piece of legislation is one of the most important ones concerning the digital domain. And we know that accessibility should be a core aspect of any digital related legislation, but in this case, it comes as well the potential discrimination that certain automatic decision-making algorithms can make and can discriminate persons with disabilities. So we are working very closely with the Parliament to ensure that this regulation is not a directive in this case, it's a regulation, so even stronger, really puts fundamental rights at the center of the use of artificial intelligence, which we know is very good for certain aspects, accessibility, enhancing accessibility, and so forth. But with certain uses, it can definitely, as we've seen in many cases, discriminate against those who don't comply with like the average user of the data set. So we are working very, very intensively on that. Another important, very, very important legislation that we are working on is the directive on combating violence against women, because we want to ban practices such as forced sterilization of women with disabilities. Currently, there are at least 13 countries in the EU that allow forced sterilization of persons with disabilities, and we want to ban this in this legislation. Another one that we will be working at is a directive on equality bodies to ensure that these bodies that investigate cases of discrimination at national level, they also become inclusive and accessible for persons with disabilities so they can investigate when a case of discrimination happens. And lastly, we expect also this year, this is going to be a busy year, a new legislation concerning passengers' rights, concerning, for example, when we multimodal transport. So when we buy a ticket, for example, we need to make sure that if that ticket combines, bus and train and plane all in one ticket, persons with disabilities have the possibility not only to buy it in an accessible manner, obviously, that is kind of covered by the European Accessibility Act, but also that, for example, we can request assistance throughout the journey, even if we change the transport modes. And then more precisely on accessibility, and I will conclude with this. Again, I think it will not be me if I don't mention standards. This year is going to be very, very busy on the standards front. Susanna knows this well, because the Accessibility Act, as you know, will develop 6 standards to demonstrate compliance with the legislation. So we really need these super technical documents for companies and public administration to prove that they are in line with the legislation. Also, a brief update is that finally the Web Accessibility Directive evaluation was published, and we were glad that they included many of our views on the good things and the bad things as for the implementation of the Web Directive. And then we expect that this year we will have some more information about the media accessibility, about the Audiovisual Media Service Directive, because countries, they should have reported how they make, how they ensure that TV channels or video on demand platforms such as Netflix or HBO, for example, they make their services, meaning their programs, films, series, and so forth, more accessible for persons with disabilities. So we hope we will have more information on this front very soon. And my last note is just to announce that this year we are very glad of organizing, along with the European Parliament, the 5th European Parliament of Persons with Disabilities, which will be a huge event. In my 10 years at EDF, this has been one of the most moving and impactful events that I've been, in which we fill the hemicycle of the European Parliament in Brussels with delegates with disabilities from all over Europe to discuss directly with MEPs, with the commissioners, with the presidencies of the council, what are the priorities for persons with disabilities. It's a way to show not only the strength of the disability movement and our commitment to the EU and the European project, but also what we expect from them, because there will be 1 year before the European elections. This 5th European Parliament of Persons with Disabilities will happen on May 23rd, on Tuesday. Our national members will be the ones creating the national delegations, ensuring diversity of representation among disabilities and within the country. And then we also expect the MEPs, the members of the European Parliament, to support the delegation with the visitors program of the European Parliament. So if you are interested in participating, please reach out to our national member. We have members in all countries, and they will tell you how they are creating the national delegation. But it's going to be huge and hopefully very, very impactful. So I will leave it there for your question, and thank you very much. And I hope it was not too boring compared to the projects.
Thank you, Alejandro. Absolutely not boring, and loads of good information. And again, I think maybe we should do these policy updates, like you speak for 1.5 hours and we say hello. And I don't know how many hundreds of people do you have in EDF now, staff? Because I mean, with all of this, I don't see how you.
We don't have so many, but we have very good staff.
Yes, and you never sleep, right? You just work 24 hours a day or something like that. So thank you. That was extremely useful and very thoughtful. And I got loads of new ideas, and I'm really happy that you are very good at giving kind of the broad picture, but also the small details. So thank you. Thank you for that. We have got one very specific question for you around the disability card. Is that the card with the sunflower?
With the sunflower?
Yeah, I don't think so, but I
think the Commission has not yet decided the layout and the design of the card, but we can definitely propose a sunflower if that's the. No, I think that's another initiative. Now that I think of it, no, this is the design is not design. I mean, the design is not ready yet, but it's basically a card that you can get at your own member state if you are certified as a person with disabilities, and then you can take it with you when you travel across Europe. So other member states will recognize that you have a disability. So that's the idea, but the details are not yet set. Obviously, these are the kind of things that we will need to tell the Commission in the public consultation. Mm-hmm.
That's good. So they will be surprised if the public consultation result is that please add a sunflower. But I think it's a nice idea. And another question is if you could just briefly describe the difference between the Web Accessibility Directive and the European Accessibility Act. This is the favorite question of everything, but why are there two different laws, and why isn't it just one and the same?
Well, why there is only one? I cannot answer that. That's how the politics worked back then when the Commission was deciding whether to legislate on accessibility or not. The thing is that they started with the public sector, and finally, after years of campaigning, they moved to the also other fields, including the private sector as well. In short, the difference is that the Web Accessibility Directive only covers the websites and mobile applications of the public sector, and the Accessibility Act covers a list of products and services, which includes websites and mobile applications, we must say, of the private sector. So in the end, as for the accessibility requirements, they are both aligned. So there will be no difference between the level of accessibility of a private website and of a public website. But one just covers the public sector, and the other one covers other products and services, including the private sector as well.
Okay, thank you. I think that is a recurring question that keeps coming. It's kind of difficult for people to distinguish between the two, and I understand why it seems a bit sometimes difficult. So we have a question around the cognitive project. I don't know if we still have Lisa with us. Problems with seeing everyone, but I think she's here. So do the vocabulary tooltips work on mobile devices too? I like the idea of a vocabulary list on the page. So Lisa, did you do the prototypes also in mobile, or how was that?
No, we didn't. So this was a smaller project, so we had limited resources for the testing. But we could say that what we were doing was a proof of concept testing. So there is this criteria about vocabulary support, but it doesn't define how you should apply this criteria. So we wanted to try different techniques or solutions. So the tooltip was one of the solutions that we wanted to test. Is this something that could actually help the users? So we tried this. We did the user testing on desktop. So that would be the next step to see how it would work in mobile and how it would work in different kind of contents. And how it should be also the format of the tooltip. Here we only tested one format of how it could.
Yeah, and I think so. It's also in this project we worked with prototypes, so we didn't actually develop new technology to do this. So it's kind of a draft, or if you will. So, it would be, I think, really, if this idea. I think it's possible to do it on a mobile, definitely, but it's really the design of it and how much do you show and how much of the small screen would it take and so on. That would need to be to be really carefully designed and tested. But definitely the idea is that these criteria should work on as many different devices as possible and be kind of applicable to many different situations. But you may have to kind of organize it differently or design it differently, or be flexible, just as you need to be flexible with other things when the format becomes smaller. But it's a good question. So we got comments now on the sunflower. The sunflower issue was a big one. So the sunflower is a card to identify persons with hidden disabilities that may be used mostly in the UK. So good. But I think if we want to apply this in the EU, don't say the word UK, because that is usually sensitive. Just say that it's something that has to do with hidden disabilities. Then we may be successful with that. So, and we got also comments around different startups and companies already working with AI solutions for easy language and so on. So I think we can also collect some of those resources and send out in the thank you email. So just to show a little bit of what is going on in different countries, because there are already tools on the market that do this. And another question is about the information overload that Lisa spoke about. So if information overload cannot be solved through structure, how do we cater for the needs of all users when the level of a proper amount of information, quote unquote, is variable? And the question is really how designers and developers of IT services like websites or applications should kind of go about. And I think this is a very, very good question. And I want to stress that we also strongly believe that structure can help a lot, and UX design and design. And we have done many other research projects where we have been kind of successfully worked with the structure and formatting. And of course, that is extremely important. It's just that on this specific website, it is the amount of text and information is really huge. And then it seems to be kind of a limit to what you can do with structure and design. And if it's kind of too much, then at least some user groups, they will become overwhelmed. So I don't think it's a kind of, don't bother about the design and structure. That's not kind of the conclusion. It's just that there is a limitation. I mean, when the kind of the big pocket of information becomes so huge that you can't really support all users. I don't know what you say, Lisa, but I think that's kind of the message we would like to.
Yeah, you're right, Susanna, what you're saying, that we would say that structure is very important. That's also why we wanted to test this on this specific website that had this huge amount of text. So we know that when we wanted to stay and work with that amount and just see how much could the structure help. So just in these tests, the result didn't show that much of a difference, but we do know from other projects that we've done that it does make a difference. So you should, I would say, work with structure, and you can work with structure in different ways. So that's also important. It depends on the content that you have and how you work with structure. But even if you have a lot of information, it's so much how you present it, in which way, and what is the most important information to present that first, not show all the information at once, and also what kind of groupings that you do and the headings that you use. So it's all these small things that makes it easier for the users to find information. But what I would say that this, if you are working with this huge amount of information and that's what you're dealing with, I would say work with the structure, do your best, other best practices of what you know, but then always do user testing, because that's what it has come down to. It's your website, the content that you have. It's very specific. So you need to test with real users to see how the structure that you have applied, how does it work for your target audience and for different user groups. So.
And one of the really nice things with this project, I think, is that the website owner has already started to do updates and change things. I mean, that doesn't make that from one day to another it's perfect, but at least just the result of the user testing has already, before the project results are kind of public, they have already started understanding what this is about. So that is also another reason why user testing is so powerful, is that you can't really argue against it. If we can show that this is what the users say, then the website owner has to do something about it. So I think that's a good it's a really good piece of argument for involvement of users. So just thank you for all the good questions. We have a long question around the captioning project and really captioning for small language areas. And I think the idea here is that the auto captions are not good enough. And I agree with that. We struggle with it in Swedish and in Norwegian and many of the other small language areas as well. And auto captions are definitely not really up to standards yet, but when we do testing with the users, hard of hearing users, they tend to say that even if it's just 80% right, or I mean, it's better than nothing. That doesn't mean that we should be, that it's good enough, of course. It needs to be becoming better, and it is becoming better. And what we do in the Swedish project is that we work together with the technology companies to make sure that they do get more data in these small language areas. And if we succeed with this, and if we can prove that collecting data this way and making sure that the usage of the auto captions in a small language area actually influences or has an impact on this, and that we can measure the quality improvement, then that is a methodology that I hope and believe can be used also in other language areas. And I know all the big companies working with this, they are very aware that there is a difference between the quality and so on, but it's a very highly technical issue, of course, but mainly it has to do with the number of the amount of data around. So small languages have to struggle and focus really on this. But of course, whenever possible, use professional captioning. That's always going to be better. It's just that if we want everything to be captioned, I think technology also needs to be improved. And then we need standards for this so that we can say that these captions meet the standards. And then we can maybe push for more legislation and so on. So thank you very much for today. We need to wrap up. I usually pride myself with being timely, and it's already 1 minute past 2:30, but loads of good information from all speakers, especially thank you to Alejandro, of course, for giving us this fantastic update, to my colleagues, to the really good accessibility service providers, our captionists and interpreters that we have used today, and who have provided us with all this good information together. So thank you very much. Do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas on projects. And also stay tuned on all the really interesting things that EDF is producing. Loads of good material always to follow. And stay tuned for the next update, hopefully before the summer. And have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.